40 years ago in Spain, the police faced a strange case concerning the disappearance of 6 young children. The only survivor of the incident described his experience like a fantasy, which made his words hard to believe, and so the case has remained unsolved to this day. The story is centered around a family of 4, Mark, his wife, and their 2 children, Regina and Paul. They have recently moved to Spain from the US and are in the process of settling down. It is a busy time for the family with all the unpacking, the children trying to adjust to their new school, and the parents trying to adjust to their new workplace. They also get in touch with Mark's father, Albert, through their housewarming party. After the party is over, Regina goes to take a bath while her brother sits down to draw with his colored pencils. Just as Paul draws a line that cuts across the neck of his drawing, the lights start flickering throughout the house. Everyone chalks it up to the house being old, but at the same time, a mysterious figure is standing outside in the rain and staring at their house. Days pass, and on one rainy Tuesday, Mark and Paul get stuck in a traffic jam while the radio goes on about a special eclipse that occurs every 40 years, which is going to happen 5 days later. Bored by the news, Paul turns off the radio to talk to his father instead. Mark happily indulges his son and talks about how he had moved to the US with his mother after his parents split up. He was about Paul's age back then. The atmosphere soon goes from happy to terrifying when Mark suddenly has a seizure inside the car. Glimpses of his forgotten childhood memories flood Mark's head. In his memories, he is with other children and they are fearfully running away from something. Luckily, the bystanders come to the rescue and rush him to the hospital. The doctor assigned to him is his father, Albert, and Mark's wife couldn't be more thankful for that fact. The seizure is because of Mark's Huntington disease, and Albert prescribes him some medicine and tells his wife to be careful because taking a pill while having a seizure might result in choking. But Albert reassures her that overall, it is nothing serious. Regina is waiting at the doorsteps when Mark and the rest return home. She is worried sick, but her mother brushes off her concerns and says everything will be fine. The uneasiness in her heart only grows when her mother refuses to talk about this matter any further. That night, Paul sits on the floor of his bedroom while drawing with his favorite color pencils. But right then, something unusual happens. A pencil rolls under the bed by itself without being touched by anything. Tense, he tries to retrieve the pencil, but before he could reach his arm under the bed, Mark opens the door and strides into the room. He moves to turn off the lights, but Paul makes an unusual request to keep them on for tonight. And since Mark is a great dad, he still turns them off before leaving. Inside the dark room, Paul grows alert and sits up on the bed. He watches, paralyzed with fear, as one of his toys lights up by itself and starts moving. Unable to sleep, he goes to the living room with his drawing materials. Regina finds him late at night drawing while sitting at the dining table. She's a little confused when he says that he is afraid to sleep in the dark because Paul has never been afraid previously. But according to him, the darkness in this house is different, so Regina promises to stay with him until he falls asleep. After being put at ease by her words, Paul leaves to get ready for bed. Curiously, Regina peeks at his sketchbook only to see multiple drawings of children with a red line across their neck as if someone had cut it. When Regina goes to ask Paul about the drawings the next morning, she sees a strange mark on his neck. Paul says that he has already shown the mark to their mother and she believes that he probably did it to himself in his sleep. Before Regina could mull over it any further, her new friend arrives to help her paint her room. While he paints, she goes back downstairs to grab some paint thinner when she overhears her father arguing with an electrician. Mark had hired the electrician to check the lights of the house that keeps flickering constantly, but nothing is found wrong with any wiring or light bulbs. Dissatisfied with the results, Mark gets in a heated argument and refuses to pay a single dime before slamming the door shut right at the electrician's face. Regina watches it all unfold with an awkward expression and goes back upstairs. She feels that everyone has been behaving strangely since they moved into this house. So that night, she stays up late to have a talk with her mother after she returns home from work. Regina expresses her concerns about Mark's unusually short temper and Paul's creepy drawings, but like always, her mother dismisses it all and does not pay any mind to her worries. That night, what appears to be figures of children stand inside the house in complete darkness, silently observing the family. The next morning, Regina is woken up by the sound of Mark tearing down a wall inside the house that had sealed an old room. He brings out old pictures and record players from the room and refuses to let Regina touch anything. She is skeptical about how he knew about the hidden room, but Paul claims that Mark is lying because he never told him anything about the room. Right then, Regina notices another bruise that has formed on Paul's neck. She is furious at how her mother is dismissing every strange thing that has been going on. Her mother calls Regina paranoid, causing her to storm off in a fit of anger. She goes to confide in her friend and tells him everything, even her past where Mark's Huntington disease had gotten so severe that she had become afraid of him. She feels lighter after getting it all out of her chest and returns home. At home, she runs into her grandfather, who has come to check up on Paul. Seeing her so agitated, Albert tries to soothe her worries, but he is very curt about it, so this only makes her more anxious. That night, abnormal things happen one after another. As the storm rages, the swings outside start swinging by themselves, and inside, Regina's hairdryer starts malfunctioning. And Paul is sitting on the floor of his bedroom with his colored pencils when one of them mysteriously rolls under his bed again. Downstairs, Mark and his wife are having a conversation when he slowly falls into a trance. He starts chopping potatoes more and more recklessly as his anger flares up and he starts hallucinating again. He sees the same scene of children running away and sometimes walking creepily as his wife gets more frightened by the second. Regina hears her mother scream for help and she rushes into the kitchen to see Mark's hand gushing with blood. As the lights die out, she panics around while trying to stop the bleeding and her mother fiddles with a fuse box to get the lights back on. After Regina finally manages to tie up Mark's bleeding hand with a cloth, a terrible scream comes from Paul's room. Paul is locked inside his room as the same creepy children slowly approach him. He desperately tries to open the door while begging his sister for help. Regina, who is just outside the door, is just as frantic. She cannot get the door to open no matter how hard she tries. Right then, Mark rushes over and starts pounding on the door while screaming Paul's name. This makes Paul get even more scared and Regina yells at her father to calm down. All of a sudden, everything goes back to normal. When the power comes back on, everything goes silent and the door opens up with a click. Paul comes out of his room and goes straight into Regina's arms for comfort. Disappointed and mad at Mark, she takes her little brother back to her own room. The very next morning, she goes to find the architect of the house. He is the only lead she has found after conducting a thorough investigation, which was not able to uncover the identity of the previous owner of the house or even the agent who sold it to their family. The architect does not know their identity either, but he is able to provide some other crucial information. The house was built by occultists and was involved in a mysterious case 40 years ago where 6 children disappeared inside the house and only one was able to make it out alive. They were involved in a ritual that required sacrificing 7 children to harness the power of darkness. The architect warns Regina to get her brother out of the house before he becomes the 7th sacrifice. While Regina is questioning the architect, Mark's mental health is deteriorating. He has begun remembering conversations that never happened and hallucinating about maggots crawling on the walls. By the time Regina gets home, he has already been taken away to the hospital by an ambulance. Regina makes her friend drive Paul and her mother to the hospital, where she stays behind to investigate the house. She cautiously enters the hidden room and finds a box filled with children's belongings like dolls and sketchbooks. While looking through the items, the telephone starts ringing. An ominous feeling spreads throughout the house as she silently walks down the hallway to the phone. After she picks up the phone with shaky hands, she hears sounds of children's laughter. which pauses abruptly before an eerily sweet voice says that they are always watching her. The call then cuts off. The phone starts ringing again, and she picks it up to yell at the caller, but this time it is her mother. Regina sighs in relief, but before she could speak about the house, the call strangely ends. Before she goes back upstairs, she sees something peeking out of the destroyed floor in the living room. She warily steps inside the room and starts removing the floorboards one by one until she reveals an altar-like marble circle, which gives off a sinister feeling. She heads straight to the library the next morning with her friend. There, she finds out that the altar is linked to the satanic ritual of sacrificing 7 children whose throats must be slit by the person who loves them. But as the architect had said, only 6 children were killed 40 years ago. A horrible realization dawns upon Regina. Tomorrow, on the day of the eclipse, it is the perfect time to sacrifice the 7th child to complete the ritual. She hurries to the hospital to beg her mother not to take Paul back to the house tomorrow, but again, her mother refuses to see her perspective. Desperate, she goes to Albert for help. He listens to her patiently and assures her that he would not let Paul go back to the house. When he steps out to contact the hospital, Regina gets a call from her friend, who has found the address of another person related to the cult incident. Regina's mind goes numb when she hears the familiar address. It is the address of her grandfather's house, the one she is in right now. She goes further into the house in complete disbelief, but all the old pictures and articles she finds act as evidence of his involvement. Albert takes advantage of this moment of her weakness to attack her and ties her to a chair. Having been discovered, Albert doesn't hide his secret anymore and tells her everything. He reveals that the ritual had failed because he didn't love Mark enough to fulfill the condition of children sacrificed by the hands that love them. But now, after 40 years, the ritual is finally going to be completed. Regina cries and begs him to not harm Paul, but he laughs at her face because of her stupidity. The child who must be sacrificed has been Mark all along. While she laments, Albert has a sudden realization of her love for her father. He quickly frees her and tells her to run back home, as Albert is now aware that she would be the one to carry out the ritual, whether knowingly or unknowingly. While Regina is sprinting home without stopping, Mark's mental state has sharply declined. In a crazed frenzy, he keeps banging on the door, demanding his wife to come out. His wife and Paul are on the other side of the door, frightened and trembling because of Mark's deranged state of mind. She begs her husband to take his medication, and he eventually does, but since he keeps rage muttering to himself while shoving pills down his throat, he starts choking on them. Mark stumbles and falls down at the altar in the living room, and his wife quickly follows to help him. She tries to perform a tracheotomy to save his life, but cannot bring herself to make the cut. Regina reaches home right at that moment and takes over to cut into Mark's throat. But when it is time to insert the makeshift tube into the cut, the tube has suddenly disappeared. They panic and search around them, but it is too late. Mark has already died. The ritual is complete, and the eclipse begins. The world gets engulfed in darkness. Regina miserably searches through the house for Paul, pushing through all the ghostly figures and miserable sounds. When she finally finds her little brother, she quickly grabs him and tries to run out of the house. The darkness has taken the form of Regina and Paul and fools the mother into turning off her light. But the real Regina and Paul are not so easily fooled by their mother's doppelganger and manage to escape out the window and drive off in a car with Regina's friend. Just as they drive off, Regina's real friend gets to the house and is lured in by the sound of Regina's voice. The siblings are inside the car, hoping to escape to a new life, but what they don't know is that the darkness has already managed to fool them. As the car drives into a dark tunnel, their fate has already been sealed, and there is no escape. And that's a wrap for this movie recap. Thanks for watching.